But let's dive into what this thumbnail is, Ethan. We got some
Mm.
lineups. Me and you made a bunch. I'm gonna give you the floor, bro. Just give me what you came up with.
First one I feel like is the most likely scenario. It doesn't deviate from like the norm all that much. So assuming that we re-sign some of these guys, that's the caveat. But here's my starting lineup. We got Trey Jones at the point, Devin, Keldon, Jeremy Sohan, and Victor Wembanyama at center. And then backing them up would be, I mean, you can put Devonte Graham in there, but I would much rather give the minutes to Blake Wesley, especially since he got a majority of his minutes in the G League and had injuries last year. Might as well throw him into the fire. So he's got the backup point for me. Then Malachi, of course. I put Julian Champagnie over Doug at the backup three. I feel like he really played his way into some meaningful minutes, and he's young. And if he's playing poorly, then you can just sub Doug in there for him, and you don't really lose anything as far as shooting is concerned. Um, Backup four, I have Keita Bates Diop. That could also be Mamu if we sign Mamu. You were telling me earlier he's unrestricted, so that's not guaranteed. That's also assuming that we bring back KBD, which
Mm-hmm.
I think that we will. He feels like a lifelong Spur in my eyes.
Yeah, especially with the Community Assist Award he got
Yeah.
nominated for this year. There's a lot of content the Spurs put out with him too. It just
Yes.
really feels like and with the way he played this year, I mean, becoming almost, I mean, like his improvements in his 3-point shot, not that he
Yep.
was terrible beforehand, but became much more reliable when he was wide open and just as a stretch four, putting the ball on the floor, his length.
Mhm.
The infamous moment we were talking about, sometimes he just decides not to dribble, puts the ball in the air and Euro steps because he's 6'8"
Yeah.
and he's got a long wingspan. So I could go on and on about KBD, but I mean, just especially with the addition of Wemby, like he feels like just the perfect backup for.
Agreed. Agreed. And then the backup center spot, Zach Collins, and then rounding out the rotation, Charles Bassey. And then, of course, Gorgie. I don't know if he's on a contract right now,
He is
but
not.
he's not. Then he might be gone. But I
Might
feel
be
like if
assistant
we,
coach, baby.
he could be. He could be.
Somebody
If
said that
we,
in the comments of one of our last
oh,
videos.
really?
Yeah.
If we have an open spot, I think maybe we bring him back on a minimum just because for veteran presence. But to me, that's the most likely scenario that we have next year. Do you want me to give you my other one as well, Jude, or do you want
Yes,
to? Okay.
please. Yeah. Go. You just dive into it and then I'll give
All
you
right.
mine after.
Perfect. So here's another option. This is reliant on the fact that we've talked about before. Pop has called Jeremy a natural point guard, and he showed glimpses of playmaking last year. Even took that point guard role when Trey Jones is hurt early in the season. So we got Jeremy Sohan at the point guard, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Victor Wembanyama at the four, and then Zach Collins paired along with him in the front court. Just kind of offer some extra physicality, not force Wemby to guard some of these bigger centers that he might not be ready for. And then the bench, Trey Jones, Malachi Branham, Julian Champagnie, KBD, and Charles Bassey. And then I think Doug, Mamu, Devontae, they're kind of up in the air. I mean, Devontae and Doug obviously are under contract, but I don't think they'll get nearly as many meaningful minutes next year.
I
Devontae,
think really their minutes just depend on, well, one, what we do
injury,
this offseason if they're still on the team. But
true.
if they are on the team, I think that their minutes literally they just depend on Champagnie and Blake. And
Yeah.
I think that's much more of really a Blake Devontae conversation.
Mm,
If they
yeah.
don't feel like he's ready, I could see them saying, "Hey, Devontae, just run the point, until like December, and we're gonna stick Blake in the G League again."
It's fair.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that I think that one's much more likely. Where Champagnie and Doug, I really think it could just be like who's hot, man, because
It could be.
they're very like the only thing that Champagnie has on Doug is one, he has just much more potential because he was a rookie last season and he's 22 years old.
Yeah.
And also he's just a better. He's already. I think you could argue a better defender than
I
Doug.
think so. I think so.
Um, and but other than that, offensively, they're basically the same player.
Yep.
Literally, like you either score on cuts, wide open layups, or taking shots.
Yeah.
So that are usually catch and shoot. So those guys I think can kind of just be interchangeable depending on injury. But I really think I agree with what you said. I think Champagnie played into that role. And man, I saw some highlights. I was getting flashbacks from the Austin
Hmm.
game. There was specifically like highlights on all of his scoring plays from the Austin game where he had 26 and something else super efficient. And it just reminded me of that and watching that in person. And just seeing all those highlights today, it's just like it just reminded me of Champagnie. And he is somebody who is a restricted free agent. His qualifying offer is like 1.7 million, so that would just be a steal.
Yeah.
If
I
we
agree.
can bring him back on that.
He and Trey, I think it goes without saying. Trey Jones and Champagnie, I'm pretty sure guaranteed they're coming back next year.
Yeah,
Pretty sure.
J. June, P. Telford, I appreciate you being in the chat, man. I see you have a different opinion on Champagny. You say he's garbage, but I think, man, you might have tuned out at the end of the year because he had
Yeah,
like
he was.
multiple 20-point scoring games and just was, I mean, efficient, shooting like in people's faces with confidence. That's at least what I saw from him from the end of the
Mhm.
season. You may still differ on that opinion, but me and Ethan really like him and feel like the Spurs are going to bring him back.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. But getting into some other lineups, Ethan, do you have anything else on yours, or you want me to dive into mine?
No, not really. It would all depend on if we bring a free agent in. It might change something, but I doubt that we make any moves in that regard to bring anybody in that would have meaningful, rotational minutes outside of these guys.
Right, right. All right. Well, so when it comes to mine, I really the more I've thought about this, Ethan, and I know I could see it not happening, and I understand how people might be like, why would you think this? But with once again with Pop's comments, not just on Sohan saying he's a point guard, but also his comments on Zach Collins at the end of the season,
Mm,
talking about how he feels like he's the future five of the Spurs moving forward.
yeah.
Obviously, that's before you had Victor Wembanyama, so that's a big asterisk. But I really feel like he likes both of those guys at both of those spots. So
Mm,
my first lineup is Sohan at the point, Devin at the two, Keldon at the three, Wembenyama at the four, and Zach at the five. But here's the thing that we didn't really dive into a second ago when you mentioned that one, Ethan. And here's why I'm really convinced that the Spurs would like this, and why I feel like it's the most likely, at least,
mhm,
and what I would want to happen, just as my opinion. The defensive versatility in this lineup is like it's so good, dude. like
yeah.
like really the only I mean, you can say if you want to point out the weak points, I mean, it's Keldon and Zach. And we talked last year all about Zach Collins' defensive improvement, not only on the interior, but also on the perimeter as the season ended. I'm not saying he's, he's Gary Payton or anything, or that he's even Shaq, on the interior. Like he's gonna still get bullied by some guys, but he's still, someone who can hold his own in the post and on the perimeter. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of that has to do with just getting more comfortable, under his legs after the injuries, as we've mentioned so many times on this channel. And then of course Keldon, I would argue that he's almost at a better place than Zach defensively. And I don't think that like just as an overall like rating, if you want to rate him defensively, there's still some times where he gets beat, but he has the frame and he all it really to me, when it comes to him, it's all stuff like mental stuff on defense, or it's either effort or, just IQ. And he's going to be another year better. He's going to be
Mhm.
getting those big bucks this year. So I think that's probably something that they're focusing on in the offseason for him. And, paying him that money, I feel like we've talked about this a million times too, but I
Yeah.
feel like they really believe in him to take that next step as well.
Yeah, it's one of the only things in his game that's not consistent. So it would make sense that it was something that got better going into next year.
Yeah, so I mean, those are the only two weak points, really. You could argue in some cases, and then you've got Wembenyama, who, as we've talked about so many times, I mean, has the ability to really just block anybody at any time, no matter where he is on the court, if he just closes out.
Yeah,
Um, the ability, as Brian Windhorst talked about, to guard the 3-point line and the rim at the same time. But even if he gets beat and confused, like sometimes there, at the minimum, he is just. I mean, he has an 8-foot wingspan. The rim protector ability that he has is just ridiculous. I don't even need to talk more about it on that point. But then you've got Sohan and Devin as well. And that's the key thing for this lineup defensively, because those are two guys who like already have a really strong foundation defensively and can lock guys up and get steals and have, caused problems this year. I mean, we saw it so many times. Some of the fights that Sohan got in were because of the annoyances he was causing players on defense. You know,
hmm
so the not just everybody being at least 6'6", and then having somebody like Sohan who's 6'8" at point 7'4", and then 6'11". The defensive
yeah,
versatility in that lineup, I just think would be it would be pretty. I don't want to over exaggerate by saying it would be scary, because I still think the Spurs are going to be sub 40 wins next season. But
for
at the
sure.
same
For sure.
time, I think down the line, that is there's a lot of defensive potential there. And with all the length in that lineup, I mean, you're going to be clogging passing lanes a lot.
It's something to keep an eye on for sure. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that's what we rolled out to start the year, because we're trying to get back to that defensive identity that we were, you know, so identified by. It's such a stupid way to say it, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Right, right.
We were a defensive team.
That
So
was, yeah.
to get back to that would make a lot of sense. And looking at the comments right now, a lot of people are talking about Keldon going to the bench or even Jeremy going to the bench. And it's a discussion that might need to happen in the next couple of years. But as of right now, I don't see anybody available that's a big enough boost over those two guys. In my eyes, Jude, do you see anything like that right
Yeah,
now?
I don't. Maybe down the line, that's what
Yeah,
ends up happening, or maybe if there's like a weird scenario where like there's an injury and like Pop feels like it's better for one of them, for the bench
yeah,
to just have more firepower. But I think definitely both of those guys are going to be in the starting lineup next year for
yeah.
sure.
At least for
Um,
this next year, yeah,
like
definitely.
I was listening to Tim McMahon's Howdy Partners podcast on YouTube before this. He's
Yeah,
got NBA analyst for ESPN, and also a Texas native, I'm pretty sure, which I was just realizing with the name and everything. And he had Kirk Goldsberry on, who used to work for the Spurs front office and is a scout as well, and also has Texas roots. So that was just kind of cool to like see that podcast. I didn't know it existed. But one of the things they were talking about in there was how Pop, like a conversation he had with Tim, he was comparing Sohan to Ginobili. Like,
yeah,
and not just like in a style of play sense. That's not at all what he meant, but in his competitive drive and, his fire underneath him to just get better as well. And you saw that with the free throw this year and
hmm
the shooting improvements and all I mean, that he got it better everywhere. And that was the thing that was most exciting about him as a prospect. So, um, man, yeah. I mean, definitely those two guys, Keldon, whenever it comes to just his contract that he has, and then Pop thinking of Sohan that way, and him starting for most of this year. I think both of those guys will be in the starting lineup.
I agree. I agree. I'm just trying to think right now, and if it's a guarantee, Jude, that Wemby's going to play the four, which would mean Zach Collins is playing the five next year. I like Jeremy at the point. I see someone in the comments, Fanico, comparing him to Ben Simmons a little bit early in his career. Hopefully, he's better than Ben Simmons long term. Knock on wood. Other people, like our boy TSR, have compared him to Scottie Pippen, and Scottie Pippen's point forward, kind of being the originator at that spot. Um, but if it's not him at the point, maybe Devin at the point. Like, I think what I'm really asking here is if it's not Trey going to the bench, who? Because I don't think that's a question.
Um, yeah, I don't really think
I
that's
don't
a
think it is.
question either. I mean, it would be Zach. That would be the only one if you wanted to start Trey. And that's my other lineup that I have,
Go
which
ahead.
is Trey Jones, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Jeremy Sohan, and Victor Wembanyama.
Mhm.
So that's and yeah, I mean, I really don't see it. Now I will say that Hanova's comment here,
Good
just
point.
saying that
Good point.
Sohan won Sixth Man of the Year at Baylor, and he was just compared to Manu, so
True.
that ties in as well. Kind of beats my own argument there.
He's very.
Um, was made to come off the bench and affect the game the same as Manu. So I understand that, but I just don't think that that's like when Pop said that. I think he's going to be a starting caliber player moving forward. I think he started as a rookie, and I know that it's a little bit different, but with the point guard comments and that, I would be very surprised if he came off the bench. I wouldn't hate it, but I would be very surprised.
Yeah, and the important thing to remember that we're all forgetting is with all the excitement of Wembanyama coming to the team, we're still, like you said, going to be definitely sub 40 wins next year, probably mid 30s.
Hmm.
Fighting for that 10
The
spot, if at
the
all.
Magic, and I know Banchero, that you could say that there's a gap between Banchero and Wembanyama, although I don't think that it's all that huge. Although I still believe in Wembanyama. Okay, that might be a little bit premature to say, but as of right now, I don't think that it's like we can't say that it's the most giant thing until we see Wembanyama in the league. That's another
Yeah,
discussion. But the point is, they had the number one pick last year and went 34 and 48, and they kind of have a lot of surrounding talent of other picks like Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, and all the young guys that we kind of had on the roster. Obviously, their version of that is Cole Anthony, R.J. Hampton, Franz
mhm,
Wagner, Jonathan Isaac, Mo Wagner,
yeah,
etc. But
yeah. The point I was trying to get
similar
there,
situation.
yeah,
Sorry,
very
sorry to
no,
cut you
no, no,
off.
no, you're fine. But I was leading to how many games is Wemby really going to play next year? Like probably
We're not sure yet.
50 to 60,
Yeah,
maybe. And barring injury, I just think that the Spurs will probably play this slow. And this is another thing they were talking about on Howdy Partners podcast. I also listened to the same one. And that's probably very accurate. And if that's the case, we're going to see a lot of different lineups than just the two or three that we're talking about right now. Pop
very
might pull
true.
some weird
Think about
stuff out
this
of his
year.
pocket. Yeah,
And I
exactly.
know it's different, but still, it's not like we're contending next season.
Exactly. Exactly. And I don't have a problem with that. And we've seen Oklahoma City. They had Chet Holmgren. I mean, I know he was hurt, but they sat him for an entire year. He probably didn't need to really sit for the entire year, but they were kind of trying to get a higher pick. Uh, it's possible the Spurs do kind of the same thing this year that we did last year. I know we don't really want that, especially with season ticket purchases going through the roof right now, and fans being as excited as they are. But we could very well be in a very similar spot next season, and I think we just need to kind of temper excitement a little bit and stay grounded because it's a very real possibility.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But the main thing is like this is it's not, okay, now we're gonna win the championship this next season. It's in the future because of, just the enigma of a prospect he is. Nike's promoting him as a
Yeah,
supernova. Like y'all get what I'm saying. So but I did have one more lineup, Ethan, that
go
I
ahead.
think potentially could be the case. This is the only other thing I think could happen.
Let's hear it.
Unless, like you said, Pop just throws out something that none of us expect, which could be a possibility. But Malachi at the point, Devin, Keldon, Sohan, Wembenyama. So not really too different. It's just starting Malachi. If they and I think I mean, we saw that a little bit last year, and I
Yeah.
also think that's an interesting thought with shooting as well, because Wembenyama went 1 for 2 in that playoff game, but that was his first three he had made in a while. I still think the potential on his jump shot and eventually becoming. I mean, if you go watch the G League Ignite tape, I think his shots could have translate just fine in the 2 games he played against them.
Yeah.
But it's not perfect yet. It's still a work in progress. He's still 19 years old, and that's still got some work to do down the line. So I think if that's something that they feel a little bit concerned with, because we saw Keldon can be, as much as I still think his 3-point shot improved last season, we saw him go cold at sometimes this season, and Sohan's not a reliable 3-point shooter yet.
Yeah.
And if you have Trey in that starting lineup, you know what I'm saying? Like
I do.
if Keldon's having a bad day, then you really got four, and Wemby's having a bad day, like you really got four non-shooters in the lineup. You're just left with Devin. So and also just with his season is being overshadowed by Sohan, and
Hmm.
then when you add the Wemby thing, he's just way more down the drain. I just knocked over something there,
No, you're fine.
doing some hand gestures here. But anyways, the point is Malachi, like he still has. I mean, who knows what he could be? He's just turning. I mean, I don't know if it's been his birthday yet, but he's going to be 20 going into next season.
Yeah.
And we saw him improve tremendously last year. And especially if they're like, if maybe the development, say Blake has a bad summer league and, is still just kind of really to an Austin Spur next season, that could
Hmm.
even increase that possibility as well. Now, maybe none of this happens. I'm still on the Sohan at point train. That's what I would do. Probably if you wanted to bet on the most realistic, it's probably Trey, Devin, Keldon, Sohan, Wembenyama. But
Mm.
especially if they don't like the shooting, I think that there's a real argument for that.
I could see that. I could see that for sure. And you're right. Malachi had a very under the radar improvement last year that's overshadowed by everything, and now is even more overshadowed by the number one pick coming in to the team. The only counter argument I would have for not
No,
putting him at the point
please,
guard is coming off the bench. He is that immediate spark plug, and he's so
the
important
main
to the
scorer.
identity of that bench mob. Like he comes in, what? What are you
No,
saying?
keep going, keep going.
Oh, that.
I have a counter argument to this
Okay, all
actually,
right.
but go ahead.
That he comes in and he's immediately both a ball handler and an off-ball shooter. He can space the floor, sit in the corner, come off screens, cut, and he can facilitate and create his own shot. I could argue, other than Devin, he might be the second best shot creator for himself on the team. Actually, I don't even think that there's an argument there. I think he is the second best shot creator on the team.
Hmm. Yeah, because Keldon, like, while Keldon is a better scorer than Malachi as of right now, it's not his, off the dribble moves. It's his big body nickname. Like, it's him
Yes,
bullying people
he's
to
getting it in the
score.
paint.
When it comes to a straight up bag, I think definitely it's Malachi after Devin. And this is after his rookie season. Like, and
Yes,
I know that it was a 22-60 team, but like, anyways, he's
yeah.
somebody, remember, but we'll go back. He was supposed to be a lottery pick, and we got him at 20.
Very interesting to see what he does. And he's one of the only guys as well, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I follow all these dudes on social media, and for the most part, especially the young guys, they post when they're in the gym, getting that work in,
Hmm.
picture of their sneakers. He's been kind of radio silent, other than like liking other people's stuff and commenting on the Spurs posts. But I really haven't seen that much, boosting his own profile in a way. So to me, that's even That's better. I like that because in my eyes that means he's privately working, and really hitting his nose to the grindstone. Um,
Talking about you were talking about Malachi there.
yeah,
I
Malachi.
got a
Yeah,
little
no, you're fine. Yeah,
disconfigured,
Malachi.
but yes, okay, yeah, no, that I love that because he's like, okay, I was already overlooked, even though I mean the
Yeah.
Spurs aren't overlooking him; they know what they have, but I mean that just embodies the Spurs, honestly,
Yeah.
and this is just making me think about his ties, with LeBron. Not saying he's going to be LeBron, but just being the only other like player really to get to the NBA and go to a high level college like Ohio State out of that school. So
Mm,
there's a lot of Malachi is definitely somebody who he probably feels like he's being slept on a little bit, and rightfully
probably.
so.
But what was
But
your corner argument? Yeah.
yes, so here's the thing in that lineup, Zach is on the bench. You
Mm,
see what I'm saying? So
yeah.
like now I still agree with you. I still think like I would like to see Malachi off the bench just because I think that would like when it comes to overall lineups, that's why I prefer the other two. You could, or maybe not the other two, but the Sohan lineup specifically. Um but in this lineup, I think Zach could make up for that scoring load. And the other thing is, what I put down is obviously Trey would be the backup point if he's not starting, right? And he would be the main six man too. I don't think he's going to necessarily make up for the scoring load, but you can play Champagny and Doug. But if Blake
Ooh,
takes that next step, maybe, I mean, Blake's 6'4", 6'5". He's a
yeah.
combo guard. He came in as a combo guard, and really he was more of a scorer at Notre Dame. This year, they were trying to develop all those point guard habits. He could play the 2-2 if he has it. I mentioned, maybe he has a bad summer league, but if he really takes a jump this year, he's
Mm.
still 20 years old. Maybe he ends up being the two there. But obviously, that's a very specific scenario if Malachi ends up being the point. But that was just the only other like feasible thing I could think of,
No, that's a good point.
or like realistic.
I didn't think about Doug and Champagny playing together, and Zach Collins on the bench as well, because that
You go
immediately,
Trey, Champagny, Doug, KBD, Zach.
yeah, yeah, I didn't think about that. That's also, I mean, that's versatile, and you got
Lengthy
shooters,
lineup too.
you got a low post threat, and you got a point guard that can get them all the ball where they like it. So
I feel
that
like
makes
I'm
sense.
I'm talking myself into this more.
It makes sense, but when then we go
Malachi
back,
needs to be on the bench though. Not
yeah,
because he's not a starting caliber player, but just because like you said, the best shot creator on the team just individually with handles, unless I mean we'll see with Victor.
yep, that's true.
Maybe he comes in, you know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
But it's Devin. So you want to even that out and have both of that in your starting and your bench unit.
Hmm.
You could that's why you'd want Malachi there.
Agreed, agreed. But then we come back to the thing where I think Alea, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but she brings up a good point. Wemby isn't a five. He's 7'3", 7'4", but I would rather play him at the four.
Me
And I
too.
think playing him next to Zach Collins would only help him a lot because Zach would take all the beatings for him. He would protect him. Zach and Jeremy are going to get into a lot of fights this next season. I'm calling it right now because they're going to have you
They
so.
already do.
They already do,
They
but now
did this year.
they have a number one pick, Jude. That is, I mean, knock on wood, could be fragile. He's thinner. He's foreign. He's coming over from France. He's young, and people are going to try and pick on him because of his size. Bigger guys will bully him. They'll push him around. The Morris twins, I'm sure, will get their wax in at him. And here we got Jeremy Sohan and Zach Collins, who are not going to. They're not going to live. They're not going to stand up for that. You know what I mean? So that'll be an interesting dynamic to watch as well.